Hello, I'm Sarah Hewins, and with us here today is Dom Fernandes, owner of Fresh Meadow Farms, Cranberry Farm, and Brian Wick, the Executive Director of the Cape Cod Cranberry Growers Association. Thank you both for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yep, happy to help.
Dom, I'm going to start with you and ask you the same question I asked Steve Ward last time. How did your family get started in the cranberry industry?
Well, I'm a third generation grower. So I had both sides on my paternal and the maternal side of my family were involved. Both my grandparents from both sides got involved in cranberries, and so I like to say we had no choice. Siblings, we had no choice but to be in cranberries. So we really kind of grew up in this industry. It wasn't until my father got sick that I made the decision to come back, and we all kind of had decided to move on and do some different things. But having grown up in the industry, it was kind of a natural for me to step in and try and pick up the pieces. But as I like to say, it was reluctantly. I had no intention of staying in it full time, but that was 44 years ago. And it's kind of ironic that I look back now 44 years ago and, I was kind of reluctantly getting back into the industry, and here it is all these years later, past retirement age, and I'm fighting to stay in. So it's been quite a journey.
I understand, or I think I get, that your grandparents were from Cape Verde?
Yeah, both grandparents were from Cape Verde Islands. Both of my grandparents on both sides of the, my family were born in the Cape Verde Islands, emigrated here. It was that was a huge part of the reason for that immigration pattern. A lot of the Cape Verdeans that came over, there was a famine that was taking place in the Cape Verde Islands back in the early part of the century, and many of them came over on the whaling ships, ended up in New Bedford, and it coincided with the commercial, the escalating commercial part of the cranberry industry. There was a big need for a labor force, and so many of the Cape Verdeans that came over with no intention of either staying here, many of them were working off the whaling ships, were coming here to make some money and send it back to what they used to say to the old country, to bring other family, either help other family members there or potentially come over here. And they began to, that pattern began to bring some of the Cape Verdean families down into southeastern Massachusetts, away from New Bedford, as part of this labor force, and eventually established a population. And so that my family is directly, intertwined into that whole demographic change that was taking place. My father's family were from Duxbury, and my mother's crew was from Carver, and so that's how. And I think that a lot of my passion over the years is because growing up, there were so many of the Cape Verdean stories that were related to cranberry. So many of them had that in their history. They had worked on the bogs. They had helped pick. They had helped plant bogs. That generation, that first and second generation that came over, and my generation, for the most part, we're getting away from that. We're moving out. We're looking for other opportunities. And then, as I got back into the industry, those connections, I think I really felt those connections, and I think it's really been part of the passion that's really helped to push me to promote that story. I think it's significant, and sometimes I didn't realize the significance until folks who didn't know the story would come in, and you tell that story, and even some of the young Cape Verdeans that had no idea that there was such a connection with some of their history with that was intertwined into the cranberry industry.
And Brian, you were saying earlier that the Cape Verdean and the Finns built most of the bogs.
Yeah, those are the two immigrant groups that really had the biggest impact on Massachusetts cranberries in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They really pushed the industry into that next level by providing that labor, that workforce, and they built a lot of the cranberry bogs that we still have today. Were built by those two groups. There was other immigrant families as well, but those seem to be the two main ones. For similar reasons, I think that pipeline of some came over, made some money, sent it back, that kind of thing. So I think that helped why those two groups both were so prominent here and still are in southeastern Mass cranberries.
Right, yeah. So, and Dom, you were talking earlier about the organic side of your cranberry farming. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, the organic part of it is fairly new. We started Fresh Meadow Farms, the organic aspect of what we're doing, about 2004, 2005. But it really, again, it played into some of the dynamics that have taken place over the years. As I said, when I got in back in 1981, the cranberries were red gold through 80s and into the 90s. It was on like I said, I had no intentions of really staying in the industry. I began to realize, first of all, financially, that I could stay here as a small farmer and grow the business, and it was also a great lifestyle to raise a family, come back to my roots in Carver. And so it was about a 15-year run where the economics in the industry were really good, and it was a good way to make a living as a small farmer. And then the first big crash took place. Without getting into a lot of dynamics in the industry, the cranberries were moving out of the state. We were no longer the major growing region. There were other issues that took place that first put economic pressures on pricing, and so we became a high return agricultural product and started to look more and more like a commodity as we got into the 2000s. And from that point, the margins never recovered to what they were for those first 15, 20 years of my growing experience. They fluctuated, but it's become the margins began to get a little bit more challenging. The model size began to change for the small farms, and I would consider myself definitely a small farmer here in Massachusetts.
What do you mean by model size?
Well, you could make a living, I thought a good living on, over those first 15 years with 25 or 30 acres of cranberries.
I see. Mm-hmm.
And so that as margins begin to shrink, you begin to look at scaling in order to find a sustainable model to keep an operation and obviously get it into another generation and just be able to make that work. So you have to start to rethink where you're going to be. The goal of most of us who are multi-generational farmers was to find a way to create a succession plan and get that business into the next generation. And so begin to look at, okay, what are some of the alternatives? Can you size in a way that keeps you competitive with not only Massachusetts, because now it's not just the Massachusetts model, right. You're competing against other states, Wisconsin, and later on Eastern Canada and some of the other growing regions. Or do you find a way to compete with less acreage? And I was always intrigued with organic. There were a few small organic farmers, and I decided that was something that we were going to try and make some sort of an economic model out of finding a way to compete with less acres, less production, and obviously higher margins. And the only way that I could see that could work is you would have to find a way to, fully integrate. You have to direct market, and other than a few, folks selling into local farm stands and CSAs, that's not really a model that we've been working with here in Massachusetts. Most of us we grow cranberries and we deliver into one of our handlers, and that's just the way we grow cranberries.
Can you tell us what a CSA is, our viewers?
Community Sustained Agriculture. CSAs began to pop up about 15, 20 years ago, kind of in a big way, where, let me think about that now, 'cause I know how
You're
that
like
works.
fronting the money to the farmer to help them with growing the crop that season, so they get their money up front.
That's right.
And then
That's right.
the share, in essence, you don't get part of the business, but the share for that coming crop is then shared with the person who invested in that. So it's a way for the farmer to get a cash influx at the beginning of the season, so that they can plant more and have potentially
Instead
more.
of waiting till the crop is ready.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
okay.
So
And
that's-
and that's why I'm not that familiar exactly how it works. Brian, that's right. Because the role that like someone like a cranberry grower would play is they would as part of that money, they would purchase specialty crops during certain seasons, because the fresh fruit is only there for like a month or two.
Right.
And so we wouldn't directly be part of a CSA, but the CSAs would be looking to purchase certain products during certain seasons to supplement the products that their farms are producing.
I see. Right.
So that's kind of the way that most of the growers, or any small growers that are doing direct marketing to CSAs, that's the way it works. You're not usually part of that CSA.
Okay.
So
I
I'm
see
not
what you're
actually
saying.
part of the CSA.
Okay.
But they play a big role until we sell into a lot of CSAs during that season.
So the organic part of your operation is conducted largely through CSAs, or is that?
No, we do the organic part of you can't sell enough. If you're going to do an organic operation, it may be a 2 acre or a 3 acre or 4 acre, but the fruit that's coming off of that, you cannot sell enough of it through the local CSAs or some of the farmers markets, or some pickups. So you have to find some different ways to distribute that fruit, and that's the difficult part of it, because as a small farmer, how do you get that fruit directly into the consumer? And so we've had to align ourselves with partners that we can wholesale through to get into the retail side of things. It's very difficult for us to compete with some of the large retail purchases for the retail chain. So we wholesale probably 60% of our fresh fruit through a local buyer that goes into retail. One of the outlets that has been really has worked really well for us is some of the online sales. That was one of the faster growing outlets that we've had, where we're actually selling around the country through online sales. And then because it's such a short season, and once you're handling all your fruit, you need to find a way to move some of the fruit that doesn't make it into the fresh fruit retail outlets. And so we started marketing a fresh frozen, working with the freezers, and allows us to create a presence throughout the year, not just during that October, November, early December period. So we sell frozen fruit throughout the year, and then also pick up some buyers who are looking to purchase frozen fruit, like some small juice companies and ice cream makers and things like that. So on a small scale, it allows us to move all of our fruit, direct market all of our fruit. But in order to scale that, it would mean a bigger presence inside the retail chains. You can only move so much fruit through some of these small outlets and specialty stores. So
Yeah, I imagine.
And it's hard just to, I mean, you're growing the crop, and now you're packaging it, selling it, marketing it. I mean,
Right.
it's
gotta be
hard.
It's got to be hard, yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know anything about it, but I would think that it's very difficult to grow a monoculture like a cranberry bog organically. You must have some challenges that maybe you could tell us some of those.
yeah.
Much
Yeah,
time
you
you
know,
have.
when we first began doing organic, there was a small community of organic growers, and it pains me to say that we've lost a big percentage of those. It is very difficult to do. Cranberries are a very difficult crop to grow organically.
Yeah.
I mean, the cultural controls, the practices that we use. The issue is it cuts your production level quite low. I mean, it's we do a late water every year. A late water is crucial.
Tell us what that means.
A
People
late
don't know.
water is cranberry growers all use floods. Generally, the floods are used primarily for harvest and for protection in the wintertime. And then one of the cultural controls that has always existed in the industry is what we call a late water, which is a spring flood. And even conventional growers typically will use spring floods. Most of them are shorter durations. But a late water is a longer duration flood in the spring, and what it does, it will suppress some of the fungal pressures, it intercepts some of the insect cycles, and it's about the only real control, cultural control, I think, other than some, maybe a little bit more frequent sanding, that an organic grower can use, other than, excuse me, organic inputs, which are very expensive. Some of the biological inputs that we can use, very expensive and not as effective.
What do you mean by biological inputs?
Well, what we do is, as a certified organic grower, anything that goes onto that property has to go through our certifiers. Has to be part of a farm plan that's pre-approved.
Okay.
And so generally those are OMRI approved inputs. Essentially, they're not any. You can't. It's not a conventional, fungicide or insecticide.
I see.
Or fungicide. And so we can utilize those. There are certain inputs that we can put onto those bogs. But as I said earlier, they're very expensive, and they can, most of them are broad spectrum. And so you tend to stay away from those as much as you can. One of the things I learned over the last 14, 15 years doing organic is you have to take off your conventional cap and put on your organic cap, and your threshold numbers are totally different. As a conventional grower, you're applying at certain threshold levels to hold down your insects. Organically, essentially, you let the bugs do what they do, and you get what's left. So you control kind of the entire balance the best you can, and there'll be years when you'll do pretty well, and other years where there may be an infestation and there's really no control against it. And so what happens is with a much lower production numbers, then it becomes incumbent upon us, as Brian mentioned earlier, you wear a lot of different hats. So now you got to find a way to market that, and in prices, and allow yourself to get the margins to make up for the much lower production levels that we're facing as an organic grower. So to try and grow organically the way that we typically have grown cranberries here in Massachusetts and simply send it into a handler, it makes it very, very difficult to make those numbers work. So,
And then earlier you were telling me that after a certain number of years, the production, the number of berries has decreased so much that you may have to actually rebuild the bog. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
yeah. Well, the bog that we started organically on, where we started Fresh Meadow Farms, has been in production organically now for about 16 years. And since then, we've gone out and we've looked for locations that we felt were conducive for organic production. There's a lot of factors that go into that. You've got to find a location that has a dedicated water source and, you know, enough water to do these frequent floods and things like that. The other thing is that what we do, we market ourselves, we're looking for strictly heirloom varieties. I actually think that heirloom varieties will hold up better and more conducive for an organic conversion. And so that particular bog where we started, for about 7 or 8 years, I feel, we were at numbers that were sustainable for what we're doing, trying to market our own fruit. And then some of the pressures began to get to the point where we could not control them anymore with some of the just strictly cultural controls. So my sense is that as we've gotten into other locations that we found that we've converted over to organic, is that for the most part we're looking at a kind of a period of time at which you can keep those numbers at a level where you can do organic, and then it begins to go the other way. And so at that point, you know, the solution is either to pull it out of organic, maybe clean it up conventionally, or renovate and do it that way. Some of the pressures that we found have gotten to the point where it's tough for us to continue to do organic have been fungal in particular, also some weed pressures. The cost of, there's no real good herbicide. I mean, we've done things like, we've worked with some vinegar and things like that, but you know, there's a lot of labor involved, and with the pressure with labor costs going up, it's, you know, it's one of the real difficult, I think, pests that we're dealing with is weeds. And so if you can't keep your weeds under control, things like poison ivy things have climate begins to change around here. It's become a real difficult weed to get under control, and the weeders don't want to pull it. So, so this particular bog where we started back 13, 14 years ago has gotten to a point where it's just no longer viable. We're between the fungal issues and the weed issues. We've decided that we're gonna have to cycle it out. And if it was a variety that I felt was going to be conducive to what we're doing with fresh fruit, then we would probably look to just go conventional, clean it up, and then go back to organic. But because it's a variety that, you know, it's got early blacks, it's got encroaching mongrels in there, we decided it's best to renovate it, go back to a clean how bog, and then go back into organic. So my thinking is if as a long-term strategy, if to continue to do organic here, you would need to be cycling in acreage in order to keep a kind of a stable supply. You would have to find a way to cycle acreage in to make up for potential acreage that would have to come out at some point. I just don't think that there's any way that you could, over a period of 20 years, continue to do organic with a cranberry operation here in Massachusetts. I think there are just way too many pressures. Get to the point where you just can't have a sustainable production level after a certain point in time. So
you mentioned the monocrop. I mean, that's one of the challenges. You can't switch out the crop, which other organic producers can do in row crops, where they can plant a different plant
Right.
that the pests aren't as conducive to, and you kind of rotate it out. That's one of the techniques that you can do. You can't do that with a
Yeah.
perennial monocrop like
Exactly.
in cranberries.
Yeah.
And we're also dealing with pests that have been here for thousands of years, along with our native wild cranberries. So they've been here just as long as these plants have, so we have a good solid footprint of pests that we're dealing with. And then the climate change on top of that is changing those dynamics as well. So it is hard, where some of the other regions that grow organic don't necessarily have the challenges to the same degree that we do here.
So you mentioned heirloom varieties, and you said early blacks. Tell us, why are the heirloom varieties important?
Well, I think the heirloom varieties, from a marketing standpoint, the only way that we can differentiate ourselves from what's going on in the fruit that's coming in from other parts of the country, through our heirloom varieties. You know, it's a variety that's grown here in Massachusetts. So, but I also think that of the two main heirloom varieties that have been prevalent here in Massachusetts, early blacks and Howes, Howes are by far the best cranberry variety for fresh fruit that is out in the marketplace. And obviously, I'm biased.
No, it's a fact.
But most of the fresh fruit that's on the marketplace right now is not traditionally dry picked anymore. It's no longer dry picked the way that, you know, it used to be that if you went into a store and you bought a bag of cranberries, that was dry picked. And then if it was wet picked, obviously it goes into other processed products, juices, crays and sauces and so forth. But what's really put pressure on the fresh fruit market and for fresh fruit growers here in Massachusetts is that now the fresh fruit that's in the marketplace is coming from other regions. They're able to use a process that we can't use here. It's called a wet dry. And they're able to get into the marketplace, and it sells for fresh fruit. The Massachusetts Howell variety has a much better keeping quality. It's a smaller fruit, but it's still by far the best fresh fruit that we can produce here. And
by best, you mean what exactly?
Its ability to hold. First of all, they're very tasty. I think they're tastier than what we're finding in the marketplace. I'll say that. But it's keeping quality. It has a great keeping quality. And the fresh fruit market, early blacks are a great variety, but as the market has kind of, as the retail market has evolved toward a lot of these wet dry varieties that are now make up most of the fresh fruit in the marketplace, the early black has fallen out of favor because it's the real big push in the retail chains right now is for the Thanksgiving market. The early blacks are earlier variety. They don't lend themselves as much for like the November purchases and so forth. So they're still great. They're great fresh fruit. They can get into the marketplace early, but the Howes are a variety that can transcend that, and they can hold up all the way into Christmas. So those are our two kind of most popular or most widely known heirloom varieties, the early blacks and the Howes. And from a fresh fruit standpoint, the Howes are the king out there.
So is there a sense of these varieties being sort of better for you too, or is that not?
They have
not
the
correct?
high proanthocyanid content, the PAC content are very high. I don't know all the numbers for the other varieties, but the traditional heirloom varieties definitely have, I believe, the highest, if not the highest, PAC levels.
And what is that ingredient? Why is that good?
So that's the component that people like. It has the immunity, the anti-immunity that some people consume cranberry products for.
Antioxidants.
Antioxidants. It helps with your urinary tract infection by helping to prevent the E. coli from aligning with your bladder. So all those good, healthy aspects of cranberries are driven by these components that are high in the heirloom variety fruit.
Okay.
It's still found in the other varieties and still in good levels, for sure. It's just, if you're popping a few fresh berries in your mouth and you want the most health benefits you can get from a pack standpoint, you might want to consider an heirloom berry.
Okay. So I've never heard of this wet-dry picking. What is that? I know there's wet and there's dry, but
Right.
what's wet-dry?
Right. It's a process that, because of, I don't know if it's because it's air temperatures, water temperatures, whatever. Here in Massachusetts, it's been tried. It's very, we can't make it work here. It has been tried. It's primarily, most of that fresh fruit is coming out of some of the colder environments like Wisconsin and Canada.
Okay.
And it's a way that you wet pick, but you have to get it dried in a certain period of time.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And then it can get into the marketplace as fresh fruit.
It's running through dryers.
Oh,
it has to be
okay.
dried within, I believe, 4 hours. It has to be completely dried and in. When it's tried here, most of the time, it's difficult. It's much more difficult here because the fruit has to hold up still to get it into the retail chains. The advantage is that you can pick a lot more fruit much more economically, and so that's what has put fresh fruit growers here in Massachusetts at such a disadvantage because, as we all know, I know you know, you're actually combing through that vine and
And you have to
finding
wait
ways
till
to get
11 o'clock in the morning when all the dew is dry.
That's right. And then finding a label to get those, those
Yeah.
cranberries off the bog and into and so that's that. But for us as a Massachusetts fresh fruit grower, that's the only way that we can differentiate our fruit, because if you're wet picking here in Massachusetts, there's no way to find an identifiable way of differentiating your fruit. Essentially, it's going in with fruit from all other parts of the country and the world into processed products. So when we go in and a consumer wants to buy a locally grown product, by us dry picking that and selling it through our channels, then they know they're buying a Massachusetts fruit. So that's obviously a marketing tool, but I don't know how to do it at this point outside of doing it as a fresh fruit product, because you can, as a small fresh fruit operation, we can still handle our own fruit.
So are these heirloom varieties found anywhere else except for Massachusetts?
Yeah, they're found in other growing regions. So New Jersey still has some of the heirloom varieties. Most of the other regions, well, at least West Coast as well, still has heirloom varieties from fresh fruit grown out there too. But Canada, Eastern Canada, and Wisconsin are pretty much all into the what we call the hybrids, or the newer varieties. And in Massachusetts, I'd say about, it goes down each year as they're transitioning out, but it was about 40% was the traditional varieties here in Massachusetts, the early blacks and house for the most part. There's a few other varieties as well that are called heirloom that are descendants of either one of those two, but very small quantities of those. But it's, so they are out there, but the challenge with them beyond the fresh fruit piece is that they don't yield nearly as much
And they're
as
small.
the newer, and they're smaller.
Yeah.
So the manufacturers are looking for a bigger fruit. The dried cranberry market is really what's driving the industry right now, and the manufacturers are looking for a bigger fruit that's easier to slice, packages better, presents better, and these newer varieties also yield significantly more than the traditional heirloom ones do by 2 or 3 times. So your same footprint of bog, your input costs are basically the same, but your yields aren't as much. So if you're not growing, or if you're not selling into the fresh fruit market, if you're in the conventional fruit, the commodity fruit of juice and dried cranberries, etc., your yields need to be higher if you're going to compete in that arena. So that's why we're seeing more and more growers take those older ones out and put these new varieties in, which are just traditional crosses. There's no genetic modified
Right.
cranberries. It's just traditional plant breeding, crossing different traits. And these new varieties are descendants of our heirloom variety. So they do have some of those characteristics, which is why they have still high packs and the antioxidants and all that. They're still a good nutritious berry, but they are different.
Right.
You know, their flavor profile is different. Maybe the average consumer might not notice it, but you know, for those of us who eat a lot of raw cranberries, they're not quite as tart for the most
Yeah.
part. And they have, you know, some of the colors differences.
They
And
have air inside.
yeah, yeah.
Some of them.
And for like I'm a baker. I would much prefer to bake with the smaller heirloom variety. It's a little easier to control, where those bigger berries can throw off some of your bakes and with the water content and things like that. But that's a minor problem. We'll figure that out if that's the way it's going. But so it's, in one sense, I see it. You know, it's sad that we're losing a lot of the heirlooms, but it's understandable to have
Sure.
a sustainable cranberry industry.
Sure.
You're going to need to do that. I just hope we're able to keep some of them around.
Yeah, me too.
Because of the benefits that they do provide all of us. So it's great that Dom has a home for those fruit, and hopefully we can keep those markets as strong as we can with those pressures from the other regions bringing in, you know, their other fruit, which again, fruit's fine. There's nothing wrong with that fruit.
Right.
But if you want to look for Massachusetts cranberries, fresh fruit, Dom has on his bags, there's a seal. It's Massachusetts cranberries. It's a little logo.
Oh, that's nice.
We got that established and provided it to growers who are growing Massachusetts fruit if they choose to want to put that on their label, on their bags, to help differentiate the fruit. So, you know, Dom's doing that, and that's one way that you can tell that your fruit has been grown right here in Massachusetts.
That's great. Yeah. So there was another thing you mentioned earlier, Dom, about starting to work with some of the younger growers. We got interrupted. I don't know where you were going with that, or if that's something you'd like to talk about now.
Yeah, I think, you know, as the industry continues to evolve, I mean, there are different strategies. It's so much more challenging now. Massachusetts is made up of still a lot of small farms. Unlike the other growing regions, there's a lot of small farms here. We had a gentleman in about a couple of years ago, and he was doing some work with minority farms. He spent some time with us, and he's doing this pictorial. And one of the takeaways with what he came out with when he shared some of his results was he found that, and this is across not just cranberries, obviously this was mostly just other commodity farms around, were that the farms that seemed to be having the most difficulty were the multi-generational farms. Well, multi-generational farms tend to be small, and at some point, if through generations you're not evolving, is going to have a difficult time finding succession plans to get that out. And so, you know, you get through a second and third generation. I think that's taking place across the country. Many of these farms are finding it very difficult to continue and move on. And so we're seeing that right now in Massachusetts, where we get third and fourth and fifth generation farmers, and as the kind of the optimum size has continued to grow. I'm not sure what that is, Brian might know, but I mean, there's been studies in terms of kind of an optimum size farm where you can do it full time. So most of the smaller farmers that are here in Massachusetts right now, it's really part time. You either find ways to niche, kind of like what we're doing. You obviously have to continue to renovate, and you know, it's getting production numbers up. But ultimately, there may be no way to really get to a size where that farm as an entity can be moved out in its current size. And so there are a number of farms right now, small farms such as my size, that are struggling with these issues, struggling with succession plans. And so, you know, what we're doing is, you know, is pretty unique. It's risky. It's my passion right now. As I said, I'm on the tail end of things, but there's been some interest with some younger growers that I've been talking with that are looking at different ways to continue growing cranberries as part of something else. And most of that has to do with direct marketing, and maybe in combination with doing some other things, agritourism, different ways, some sustainable methods of keeping a farm afloat. And so that's really been kind of my interest, working with not only I've got younger members of my family, but there are some younger growers at this point that are interested in what I'm doing and would like to do something similar, maybe some collaborations, and we could take it to a different level. So that's my hope. My hope is that I can continue to put efforts into that, and if it means a way that we can continue what we're doing into another generation and allow some other alternatives to keep small farms here in Massachusetts, because it's not just what's going on in cranberries, it's going on across the country. Small farms are under attack. It's just very, very difficult for small farmers, particularly small family farms, to operate in kind of traditional methods that they've been used to operating in. So they have to find some kind of different means of of keeping these farms sustainable. So that's part of what keeps me going, I think, is some of the interests I've seen with particularly some of the young small growers that are looking to do something a little bit unconventional, whether it's organic or something just it doesn't have to be organic, but some way of differentiating their farm, their product from what's out there right now. I think that's going to be one of the I think avenues where we keep some of the cranberry operations, small cranberry operations here, Massachusetts, and particularly here in Carver. I mean, Carver, I grew up in Carver back when there were 2,000 people, and we were probably the cranberry capital of the world back then. I think a lot of Carverites don't understand just how big a part cranberries played in this town, and it would be a shame to see a lot of these long-term small farms come under pressure and disappear. Talk about changing the character of this town. It would be that'd be sad.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I know why I think small farms are important, but I want each of you to tell us. You've told us it's important, but why? Why are small farms important?
Well, in Carver and many of our communities around here, a lot of the acreage of in cranberries we're talking now, are made up of these smaller farms. The average size farm in Massachusetts for cranberries is 15 to 20 acres. And as Tom said, that's not a full-time operation now, but that's your average farm size. So we have a lot of small growers who collectively help make up that fabric of the region. So there's a lot of open space that's a direct result of having a viable farming operation, because of the land's not being developed, the uplands aren't being developed. So having a good solid base of these small farms are actually contributing to the bigger picture of the scenic vistas and the
rural character
of the town. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So in that aspect, it's important to have them. And they're also contributing to the overall economy, because even if you're a small farm, you need goods and services to run that operation. It might be pipes or equipment or whatever it might be. So there's many other businesses that are directly supporting these small farms. And so when you put that all together, there's a lot of jobs that rely on the Massachusetts cranberry industry. There's a recent study was done, and there's over 7,000 jobs that rely on the industry. So
7,000 different jobs?
Yeah, different businesses, not cranberries, but all these other businesses.
Okay.
So if these smaller farms went away, some of those other businesses will also feel that. There's a trickle-down effect.
Right.
So it just adds to the bottom line of the economy, bottom line of the environment. So it's just an integral piece of the fabric of this region are these little collection of small farms, and they're, as we know, they're tucked in here and there, and if they went away, it's just going to look different for sure.
Yeah.
You might have a
Be a
different
completely
perspective there, Don, but that's
No, I mean,
be a
I
different
think
town.
Brian hit on it. I mean, small farms, small cranberry farms are Massachusetts. You go to the other growing regions, and you're just not going to find it. It's you might find the same acreage or more acreage, and just very few farmers. And here, this is just interwoven into the fabric. The small farms that are in Massachusetts, and I mean, it's the interaction between neighbors. I mean, you know who your farmer is. There's a personal relationship in many cases with a grower who knows his neighbors in the region, as opposed to what's happening in other parts of the country, particularly with other commodities with big agribusiness. So. And the small farmers, as I said earlier, they're under the most stress right now. So that's really, really the connection with southeast Massachusetts, in particular Carver. And so I would highly recommend, if you get an opportunity to buy cranberries from a local farmer, you take advantage of it. Anything that, we're all under duress at this point. And not just all small farms. I mean, the farmers in general in the cranberry industry, but particularly small farms, and because cranberries are so synonymous with this region, I mean, it's so important, and I think people don't appreciate it as much until, like with us, we do some tours and so forth, and you get folks that come in from outside the region, and they know absolutely nothing about cranberry growing, and yet they're so appreciative of what we do here in Massachusetts. And I think sometimes when we grow up here, we don't really appreciate it as much. Kind of the contribution of what this open acreage is, just the uniqueness and the beauty and of this industry down here. So, you don't know what you have until you lose it.
That's true.
And it's not coming back.
Yeah.
Once the cranberry bog's gone, it's gone.
Right.
And as you pointed out, it's all that open space around it that's part of the farm
Right.
that
And more
could have houses on it,
right.
which would not be good.
And the wildlife that live on that. So the wildlife, as we're losing from development from other parts of our communities, are now coming and finding refuge in the cranberry properties, because they're becoming what's left.
Right.
We only have so much open space and parks and that kind of thing, and so as the houses have come up, the suburban encroach, as I call it, it's pushing some of those critters down onto these properties. So they've become a haven. Sometimes too much of a like white-tailed deer, that's a problem. But there's other critters that aren't direct competitors with the cranberry plants that find home in these surrounding lands in the uplands.
Definitely. Yeah, and one of my biggest fears is the growers having to sell their land and the upland, because we just built a new elementary school, and I'd hate to see another one so soon, because it's at capacity.
Yeah.
And single-family homes bring kids who I love kids.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to say you're against that. We do have a housing problem in the state, as we know, on a different level, but it can be crushing to these small communities.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know of anyone that says, "Oh, we got plenty of room in our school system. Come on down." It's just not the case. So
it's true.
It is. It's a challenge. So having viable farms is a way to help with that balance in our communities as well.
Yeah. Well, is there anything else you guys would like to talk about that we haven't touched on here? A little wrap up.
Pretty good.
Pretty good? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both for being here. Really, really means a lot to me. Thank you.
Yeah. Great talking.
And thank you for joining us at home.